So, Margarita Simonyan is claiming that the U.S. keeps interfering in Russian elections. Um, it sounds almost like you just got the grammar or syntax to that wrong, but no, that's what she was actually claiming. Now, it was fascinating watching this when 60 Minutes just put out a video from 2018 that they republished 23 hours ago, but it was from 2018, where disinformation warfare and Russian hacking. I paused it. I'm not going to play the clip from 60 Minutes, but I paused it on this with where they're talking about it. SS with high confidence that Putin ordered an influence campaign in the 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election, and Margarita Simonyan was being interviewed here in this particular video and saying, "What? We're not doing anything. I mean, look at what your CIA does to us." And okay, with that as a backdrop, let's watch her talk on this and just hear what they're saying. Now, remember when they're talking, they're speaking to the Russian public. Okay, just keep that in mind. So this is how they're informing the Russian public. I will start with a statement of our president. He met with members of the Electoral Commission and made a statement pertaining to elections. Our elections are fast approaching, and our president made a statement. Henceforth, we will keep doing everything necessary to preclude any unlawful interference in the electoral process. Attempts of external and internal influence and pressure against the electoral process will be stopped. Just like hearing that on his face, you think, okay, that's not a bad thing. Like, sure, let's not have interference. But who's saying this, and what's actually transpiring? Like, it's Putin saying it. I read an article the other day where it was I think it was Pravda. It might have been RT, but Pravda, I think it was, where Putin is considering running for a re-election. Really? He's just considering it. He doesn't really know if he's in. Like, he's already won. I mean, like it's already clear that he's won. Dmitry Peskov just said the other day that of course he'll win. And we know it's rigged. So yeah, we don't want any outside interference with our inside interference in the elections. Okay, they will be stopped. That's understood. Rita, I want to ask what you think. Will these guys interfere in our elections? Aren't they tired of playing this game? They've been trying to do it for many years. They keep failing. Every time elections come, we say that we anticipate more interference. How will they do it? Will they do it the old way? Or come up with something new and original? Like, honestly, they're talking about how they're worried about our interference in their elections. Like, this is one of the most ironic videos that I've seen on Russian media, and that's saying a lot. Okay. I don't think it's about whether they will interfere in the political process, in our elections or any other political process on the territory of the Russian Federation. They keep doing it. They never stop, at least not since the end of the Great Patriotic War and World War II. It was always happening, and it still is, starting with their support of our dissidents. Okay, so it was striking to me when I heard her say this was not that since the fall of the Soviet Union or, since Putin started doing whatever, but since the end of World War II. Okay, so she's going back, way back. And her definition of interference is something quite different. Her definition of interference is that we support something that is not you. This is kind of the way that the Russians do things. If you don't support the Ruski Mir interpretation of the world, you're a Nazi. Right? I mean, that's the way that they treat anyone who doesn't just support Russia rolling into Ukraine and Ukraine rolling over. Okay, let's keep going. I mean, in those times, we know all too well how they supported dissidents, how they supported cultural processes in our country. They didn't do it in the interest of culture or literature. Okay, so let's talk about it. Like folks like Alexander Solzhenitsyn writing the Gulag Archipelago. Okay, which is a very, very long book. But if you want to understand the Soviet system and the evils of the Soviet system, I highly recommend it. But we're supporting them because ideologically, it made sense to support them. The Russians, not the Russians, the Soviets at the time had this ideology, this international socialism, that they were just going to take over the entire world. So supporting dissidents from that ideology made a great deal of sense. But that's not the same thing as overthrowing their elections, and they're confounding these two things. But it was because of the kind of literature that could undermine our country's foundations of statehood. In a certain sense, they succeeded at this, although they didn't achieve all they wanted. They aren't the only ones who achieved this, but our nation was destroyed. Our motherland, the Soviet Union, the motherland of everyone here except Michael, all of us were born in the Soviet Union. Okay, I've noticed a theme here, and I talked about it in the last few videos, where the Russians are almost re-Sovietizing, pining for the glory days of the Soviet Union. And that's quite a disturbing thing to watch, because the Soviet Union was, in Reagan's term, the evil empire. And it truly was. It killed millions of its own people, let alone had ambitions to take over millions of more. And it did. With the reason that NATO exists in the first place is because of the Soviet Union. And the reason that Putin is upset is because these former Warsaw Pact aligned with the Soviet Union countries have fled to NATO to get away from Russian ambition to take them again. So, I mean, this pining for the Soviet Union is really a dark kind of thing in my estimation. The same is happening now on a much larger scale. We know all their schemes and plots. We know some of them and don't know others. Well, wait a minute. Do you know all of them or don't you know all of them? I'm not sure I'm following. Especially the one as enormous as Russia. The bigger the territory, the harder it is to govern. Now that's kind of true. The Russian advantage is that they are huge. The Russian disadvantage is that they are huge. So it is going to be harder to maintain everything. It is going to be harder to defend everything from Ukrainian attacks when they start attacking in various places across Russia. This is obvious. Interethnic tensions can always be inflamed. Now, it's interesting that Margarita is saying that because she understands exactly what she's doing, because she was doing that to the United States in 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, especially 20, inflaming both the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville and inflaming Black Lives Matter simultaneously, just trying to play any conflict off one another that she could. Read this in Putin's playbook. It's on Amazon. It's a great book. It'll help you understand what's going on. In a country like this, it can be easily accomplished. First a spark, then a small fire, then a major fire. Again, she's revealing how the Russians have done this to the United States, and she's saying that this is what the United States is trying to do to Russia. And very often, in my observation is, in Russian state media, they'll blame their adversaries for the very things that they do. That you can't put out even using a B-200 aircraft. And when it's being stoked daily for years, for decades and centuries, we have to be very careful. I'm sure I'm not following this. How the United States has stoked this for centuries seems quite impossible to me. For decades, okay, perhaps going back into the Cold War, but even then, there was not a lot that the U.S. could do to undermine the Soviet political system, and we just had to deal with a Soviet political system as a fact and then have a system of detente. I want to again caution our audience. Truly patriotic people who really love Russia, people who love our motherland, don't fall for these provocations when they are trying to stir up your emotions the way it was done in Dagestan. Okay, so that's really interesting because they're blaming the West for Dagestan as if Dagestan wasn't internally created or internally allowed. They wouldn't have done it if they didn't think they could. And it wasn't with the West going, you know what, let's get you to hate the Jews. Let's get you to hate Israel, who's our chief ally in the Middle East. Let's try to get that going. I found no evidence of this. Perhaps it happened and I just couldn't see it, but I found no evidence of that. But I did find a lot of evidence of Russia immediately blaming the U.S. and the West for what Muslims within Russia did to Israelis getting off a plane in Dagestan. Sicking you against another Russian faith or against another ethnic group, you should understand that specially trained people are doing this. They're counting on your participation in destroying your own nation. It's fascinating that she says that, because that's exactly the way that Russian interference worked in the United States in the last 5 or 7 years, which is they would try to inflame things, use social media to create controversy, and they would have opposite controversies, right? Pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Hillary, anti-Hillary, just trying to get things just stirred up as much as possible. So she understands the playbook, and she's saying that the United States is doing that to Russia right now, which seems, let's say it is. It's got to be on a much smaller scale than what Russia was doing to the United States. The real question is, at what point of wasting time and resources on this when the result is basically predetermined? Well, that's really interesting. The result is basically predetermined. Putin is about to win, and he's got, I mean, like, oh gosh, he's thinking about running. Like, he'll win. There's no question about it. And if he has a real opponent, his real opponent has to make sure not to go too high up in a hotel balcony, because that would be very bad. You also have elections coming up. Are you worried? But this is a different situation. The outcome of our elections is not predetermined. There is still some intrigue. Yes. Did you see this week's main article by The Economist? The biggest danger to the world is if Trump wins in 2024. I'm not even sure what to say there. Okay, so the way that they frame this is essentially, and Margarita knows exactly what she's doing as the editor of RT, because she's been stirring this up in the United States and elsewhere for years, but she's projecting that as if that's happening to the Russian society and their electoral process. I don't think it is. Perhaps it is in some way, that there's some internal, or I just don't know. But I know that they've been doing it to the West. Anyway, tell me what you thought when you were watching this. I'm curious to hear your comments. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the comments, the coffees. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.